The fluorescent lights of the level for parking structure hummed with a low frequency buzz that usually bothered me, but tonight, it felt like a tether to reality. I sat in my car for exactly 11 minutes after my shift ended. My badge, a laminated rectangle signifying my authority as a senior healthcare compliance consultant, was still clipped to the lanyard around my neck. It felt heavy. The voicemail was 14 seconds long. I had played it 4 times. My mother's voice possessed that specific crystalline sharpness she reserved for benefit galas and formal dismissals, a voice that performed composure for an invisible audience of her peers. Delia, she had said, her tone clipped. We've discussed this as a family. We are moving forward, and that direction no longer includes you. Please don't reach out. We need the space to begin our new chapter properly. Then, the clinical silence of the recording, followed by the automated timestamp, Wednesday, 6:14 p.m. I didn't cry. I simply looked out the windshield at a crumpled grocery bag leaning against a concrete pillar to space us down. I noticed the oil stain near the elevator bank. I noticed the way the humidity was beginning to bead on my side mirror. I noticed everything except the urge to call her back. Somewhere between the second and third replay, a realization I had been suppressing for a decade finally crystallized. She hadn't just rejected me. She had finally articulated the reality of our relationship. For 10 years, I hadn't been a daughter. I had been a utility. I was the silent engine room of a ship that only cared about the view from the deck. I typed one word, understood, and hit send. I drove home, brewed a cup of tea that I let go cold on the coaster, and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the shadows on the wall. I began to think about the transfer. I began to think about what happens to a structure when the load-bearing wall simply decides to stop being a wall. My name is Delia Marsh. I am 36 years old. My professional life is spent in the weeds of financial integrity. I audit nonprofit medical organizations, tracking the labyrinthine paths where donor funds are promised versus where they actually land. I verify signatures. I check the authority of those who claim it. It is meticulous and glamorous and deeply necessary work. My family, my father, Arthur, my mother, Eleanor, and my sister, Stacia, had never expressed a shred of interest in my career, except for when they needed it to serve them. Over the last 8 years, I had become the family's unofficial infrastructure. I wasn't asked. I was absorbed into the role. I was the one who read the fine print because they found it tedious. I had restructured my father's business liability exposure twice to save him from litigation he didn't see coming. I had spent 3 consecutive tax seasons correcting classifications their high-priced accountant had missed. I had reviewed every single contract my mother signed for her role with the Regional Elder Care Advocacy Foundation. She treated that volunteer board position as her primary social credential, speaking of it with the gravitas of a CO, while I was the one ensuring she wasn't, inadvertently signing away her personal assets in an indemnification clause. The current situation, the one that had led to the 14-second execution of my status in the family, involved their downsizing. They were selling the sprawling family estate and moving into the Pinnacle, an ultra-exclusive, private residential community. They framed it to their friends as a lifestyle choice, a minimalist pivot. The truth, which only I knew because I held the spreadsheets, was that the family's financial house of cards was wobbling. The sale of the old house had to fund the deposit for the new one. The timing was razor thin. Because I was good with numbers, I had agreed to serve as the verified point of contact for the entire documentation chain. I held shared authorization onto linked accounts. I was the one verifying source of funds to the title coordinator. I was the bridge between the broker, the bank, and the lawyers. I wasn't an owner, but I was the validation. In the world of high-stakes real estate, my professional credentials acted as a seal of legitimacy. Then came the Wednesday voicemail that by 8 a.m. Thursday, I was at my desk, but I wasn't auditing a hospital. I was auditing my life. With the same clinical precision I used for work, I began the process of extraction. I wrote a formal letter to the title coordinator. I am withdrawing as the verification contact effective immediately. I no longer vouch for the accuracy of the disclosures provided. I emailed the broker. I am revoking all authorization to communicate on my behalf. Any prior representations made using my credentials should be considered unverified. I flagged the shared accounts for suspension pending revalidation. I sent a note to the family accountant. Mr. Henderson, any document previously routed through my review chain must be reissued. I am removing my indemnification language from all pending filings. I wasn't being petty. I was being professional. If I was no longer part of the family, then I could no longer provide the professional cover that a family relationship implies. I was closing the books. The first crack in their world appeared at 11:45 a.m. The title office put the closing on hold. Without my verification of the escrow sequence, the bank's risk department flagged the deposit. At 1 p.m., the contractor my father had hired to stage the old house stopped work because his deposit check drawn from an account I had just flagged wasn't clearing. But the most significant hit involved my grandmother. My mother had spent months bragging about moving my grandmother into Sovereign Grove, a luxury assisted living facility. She had used her foundation connections to skip the waiting list. But as I reviewed my personal files, I realized that the guarantor paperwork for the Grove had my name on it as the secondary financial verifier. I called the Grove's liaison. I am withdrawing my name from the financial guarantee for Mrs. Marsh, I said. But Ms. Marsh, the woman stammered. The suite is being held based on the consolidated asset report you provided. That report is no longer valid, I replied. You will need to contact Eleanor Marsh for updated payment assurances. By 2 p.m., my phone began to vibrate. It didn't stop for 3 hours. 6 missed calls from my father. His voicemails were a masterclass in escalating panic. The first, Delia, there seems to be a glitch at the title office. Give me a call. The second, 40 minutes later, Dia, the broker, is confused. We need this sorted by end of business. Call me now. By 5 p.m., my sister Stacia entered the fray. Stacia didn't ask what happened. She simply attacked. She sent a barrage of texts. What are you doing? Mom is a wreck. The Grove just called and said Grandma's room is in jeopardy. How can you be so selfish over a little disagreement? Fix this. I didn't reply. I was reading a transcript of a new voicemail from my mother. It was structurally fascinating. In one sentence, she called me calculating and destructive, and in the next, she demanded I immediately reauthorize the bridge loan. She didn't apologize for the Wednesday voicemail. She didn't acknowledge that she had exiled me. She was simply furious that I had taken her at her word. She wanted me to be gone, but she wanted my labor to stay. She wanted the daughter silenced, but the consultant on call. 2 days later, the tally was 50 for missed calls. At 8 p.m. on Friday, a message came from a law office. Miss Marsh, this is Garrett Hollenbeck representing your parents. There is an urgent matter regarding the property sequence that requires your response tonight. I stared at the screen. I felt a strange, cold peace. I wrote back 7 words. You said to move forward. I have done. The next morning, Hollenbeck called from a different number. I answered this time. I wanted the record to be clear. Miss Marsh, Hollenbeck said, his voice strained. We have a situation. Certain representations were made to third parties regarding your continued involvement. The care reservation for your grandmother, the bridge loan. They were all predicated on your participation. Whose representations, Garrett? I asked. Because I have a voicemail from 48 hours ago stating I am no longer part of this family. I have simply aligned my professional standing with my personal status. The silence on the other end lasted 6 seconds. Then he sighed. Your mother. She may have hinted to the board and the sellers that you were still overseeing the consolidation. The reality, Delia, is that your father has business debts I wasn't fully aware of until this morning. Your sister has exhausted a joint credit line. They aren't downsizing for a new chapter. They are trying to liquidate assets before the creditors move in. If you don't sign off, the whole thing goes public. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. They weren't just using my work. They were using my reputation as a shield for their insolvency. If the deal collapsed while my name was still on the paperwork, my career in compliance would be over. I would be seen as the daughter who helped her parents cook the books. I am not signing anything, Garrett, I said. In fact, I am sending you a digital folder. It contains every withdrawal notice, every time-stamped email, and the original voicemail from my mother. If anyone claims I am involved, I will release this file to the foundation board and the bank's fraud department. Don't call me again. I hung up and began to build the case file. I organized it like a high-level audit. Exhibit A, the dismissal. Exhibit B, the revocation of authority. Exhibit C, the proof of misrepresentation. That afternoon, my mother called from a blocked number. How dare you? She hissed the moment I picked up. How dare you embarrass this family? Do you know what people are saying at the foundation? The embarrassment, mother, comes from the fact that you built a public reputation on a foundation of my unpaid labor and lies you couldn't back up. You owe us, Delia. She shouted. We invested everything into making you the woman you are. We raised you to be capable. You owe us your cooperation, owed, I whispered. Not loved, not trusted, indebted. I thought about my graduate school fund, which my father had borrowed to cover a business loss and never repaid. I thought about the promotion I turned down at 24 because my mother insisted she couldn't handle the foundation's annual gala without my logistical eye. I had been paying a debt for 30 years for a life I never asked to have designed for me. I'm done paying. Mom, I hung up. 3 days later, I received an email from a former colleague who sat on the foundation board. It was an invitation to a donor reception, but with a note that you should see what's being said. The updated invitation had a small addendum. It described my mother as a devoted daughter and advocate, navigating a difficult family transition caused by the withdrawal of support from those closest to her. Yet remaining committed to the mission, she was turning her failure into a martyrdom. She was painting me as the villain to save her social standing. I decided then that I wouldn't just sit in the silence they built for me. I would inhabit it. I went to the reception. I arrived 30 minutes late, dressed in a sharp, slate gray suit. I didn't look like a disgruntled daughter. I looked like an auditor. The room was filled with the scent of lily and expensive bourbon. I saw my mother in the center of a circle, her hands moving gracefully as she spoke. She saw me, and for a fraction of a second, her face shattered. Then the mask slid back into place. She walked over, her movement frantic. Why are you here? This is not the place, Delia. I was invited into the story you're telling, I said, my voice carrying just enough to make the people nearby pause. The one where I withdrew support. You've caused a crisis, she whispered through a fixed smile. Everyone here knows you've abandoned your grandmother's care. I haven't abandoned anyone, I said. I pulled a small, slim tablet from my bag. I have the record of the withdrawal. I have the emails where I warned the broker that the assets were being misrepresented. Would you like to see the timestamps? They're quite illuminating. Stacia appeared, looking like she wanted to scream. Can you not do this here? Mom is barely managing. Managing what, Stacia? The debt you ran up on the joint line. Or the fact that the house you're standing in was built on the assumption that I would never say no. A board member, a man named Marcus whom I had helped with a compliance issue years ago, stepped forward. Delia, what's going on? Marcus, I said, turning to him. I withdrew from my family's financial dealings on Wednesday after being formally told to cease contact. I have documented every step to ensure the foundation's reputation isn't tied to the current ... instability of the Marsh estate. I'd be happy to walk you through the audit trail tomorrow. The blood drained from my mother's face. She wasn't looking at me with anger anymore. It was pure, unadulterated terror. She realized that I wasn't playing the family game. I was playing the professional one. The board chair moved toward my mother. The legal advisor moved toward the board chair. I didn't stay for the fallout. I went to the coat check, collected my things, and walked out into the cool night air. Hollenbeck was waiting by the valet stand. He looked defeated. They're going to lose the house, Delia, he said. The foundation is going to ask for her resignation. The Grove has already canceled the reservation. Your grandmother. She has nowhere to go. She has me, I said. I've already arranged a place for her. It's a modest facility near my apartment. No darkwood, no waiting list. But the nursing-to-patient ratio is actually legal. I'm paying for it myself, with the money I'm no longer spending on bridge loans for my father. Hollenbeck looked at me for a long time. You really did it. You audited them out of your life. I just corrected a classification error, Garrett. They were listed as family. I moved them to risk. The weeks that followed were not filled with a sense of triumph. They were filled with the quiet, exhausting work of rebuilding. I spent hours in therapy. My therapist asked me, when did you learn that being useful was the only way to be loved? I don't think I learned it, I said. I think I was born into the vacancy. I documented my own history. I wrote down every loan, every late-night contract review, every holiday spent fixing a business crisis. When I saw it all on paper, it didn't look like a family dynamic anymore. It looked like a predatory system. The consequences for my parents were absolute. The downsizing became a foreclosure. The move to the Pinnacle vanished. My mother was forced to retire from the foundation. They ended up in a small rental to towns over, funded by the meager remaining equity from the sale of my father's business equipment. My mother called me one last time from her attorney's office. She didn't ask how I was. She talked about humiliation. You've humiliated us, Delia, to put your grandmother in a state-rated facility. To tell Marcus those things. You've destroyed our name. I didn't destroy it, I said. I just stopped polishing it. I'm not reversing this. Mom, you told me to move forward. This is what forward looks like. 2 months later, I stood in a quiet office. There were no winter flowers, no bourbon, and no one was performing for an audience. It was just me, a notary, and a paralegal with a jar of cheap pens on her desk. I was closing on a small 2-bedroom condo. It had a view of a park and a kitchen that was too small for a gala, but perfect for one person and a guest. I signed my name on the final page. Congratulations, Miss Marsh, the notary said. It's all yours. Just your name on the deed. I looked at the signature. It was clean. It was precise. It was mine. People think self-preservation is a loud, dramatic act. They think it's a bridge burning with a spectacular roar. But it isn't. Mostly, it's just paperwork. It's the silence that follows when you finally set down a weight you were never meant to carry. I walked out to the parking lot. I sat in my car for 11 minutes. I didn't play a voicemail. I didn't check my messages. I just listened to the sound of my own breathing. And then, for the first time in my life, I drove home.